Okay, so in the previous episodes of our Audiophile Blueprint, we basically found out that the number one thing you have to know is that the only thing that counts is music. What is your music preference? And you will build your system based on what kind of music you want to listen to. And that gives you a specialized direction. You can either keep it as a general wide open field, so you listen to all kinds of music, then you have a very tough road ahead of you. Or you just listen to a subsection of music, let's say jazz alone, and then you just get gear that is specialized for producing that type of sound. So, and if you are a measurement freak, then do not use measurements at all to guide you whether you should buy a system or not. They are perfect tools when you are an engineer and you design your own products, but a part of that, forget about measurements and start using your ears. So now you know what music you listen to, so let's go and let's talk about our hearing. So when audiophiles mention their hearing, they usually talk about the high end. There's a lot of talk about the top end or high end, which means the high frequencies, and there's like reviewers are saying that this speaker is really extended, or the other speaker, it doesn't have as much high frequencies, and this is always needs to be taken with a grain of salt. And if a given speaker is reviewed to have a lot of high frequency extension, that might be a side effect that's generated by the interaction of the specific amplifier used with that speaker, plus the effect of the room. So when you read reviews about what speakers are doing, that is not just the speaker. There's a lot more factors involved that you have to take into account. But before you go into that, you have to check your own hearing. What about you? So for example, you go to a jazz concert and you sit down, listen to the sax, the trumpet. Does it bother you at all if you go as close to the trumpet as possible and he's blowing full on, and it's totally okay with you? Then you have some damage in your ear, that your hearing at the high frequencies is compromised. Because if you have a normal hearing, then you would run out crying, because the human ear cannot take that much if it's a healthy ear. If it has been damaged, compromised, then yes, it can take that. And if that's the case, then you will need a stereo equipment that also doubles up as a hearing aid. So you will need some extra frequencies extension and extra couple dBs up at the high frequencies to compensate for your hearing loss. And if you use your stereo for that and not a junk hearing aid, then that will be a lot of reward for you, not for your family. They will not like the sound, because for them the highs are way too high up. And this is why audiophiles cannot agree on what is the best system, what is the best sound, because for some people a given system has too much high frequencies and for others it doesn't have enough. So don't get hung up on this issue. Find out what do you need and go for that. And then now we need to talk about the low end as well, which is the bass response. And unfortunately, almost no one is talking about this issue because it is men doing the reviews, and 98% of men can't hear bat shite in the bass. uh, I can hear really good in the bass, or at least that was what I thought, that my ear has excellent definition in the bass. I have run across only one person, my mentors too, who had such sensitivity in the bass and could tell low level differences in the bass region, and no other man. But when I talked to Nelly, it turned out that her hearing in the bass far exceeds mine. And so when we guys are going for a system and judging bass performance, we are way off scatter. And there are very few of us like me who can hear much more definition in the bass, and that's actually a big curse, because it means that your average subwoofer or amplified subs, they will not bring you any joy, because you can hear that there are major problems in there, and then you will need to find for solutions to fix the issue with the bass. So that's about it, and that's why there's huge controversy about what has good bass, because this hearing issue does a lot of difference. So if you can hear, then those systems, what other people who cannot hear in the bass say it's great, you find them obscenely overdone. They're like, oh my god, this is EQ'd to hell and back. And those guys who have those type of systems, they listen to a system and said, I cannot hear any bass at all, what's wrong here? Well, it's the hearing that's wrong. So, but anyway, so I'm not saying that as a criticism for losing your hearing, because that happens to most of us sooner or later, but just so that you are become aware of the fact that that you will probably need a generous dab of helping in the bass department. But if you notice that when you use subs or solid state amplifiers and you don't like the bass, then you have a sensitive hearing, and probably your choice will be to go towards tube amplification and ditch the subs and just use full range speakers that can reach very low. Those are not cheap either, so you will be in a little bit of a pickle, but it's doable. But there's a really tough road ahead of you, and I have to say that most people are trashing the tube amplifiers because they do not have good bass, and that's on the merits of they do not EQ the bass up. So solid state amplifiers, they have not a linear response, but the bass rises a lot. That's how I hear them. And if you have good hearing in the bass, that's how you hear solid state amps, that the bass is EQ'd to hell and back twice. And the mid bass especially is really high amplified, and it doesn't let you hear the low bass. And when you have a tube amplifier, the tube amplifiers don't overdo the mid bass, they don't have that obscene mid bass hump, but they're more linear, more flat, and that allows you to hear the sub bass too. And that's a trick to hear sub bass, because 20 to 50 hertz, that's a region that we really mostly feel than hear. But if you have a hearing acuity in that region, it's a really major trip if you have a system that can correctly reproduce that without over dampening the sound. Because for solid state amplifiers, they advertise them that they have a very high damping factor. That's the new fad. New, it's been like for 20-30 years, so not so new fad, but a fad that's going on. that you need super high damping factor, then that's right, because then you will have good control over those type of speakers that match well the solid state amplifiers. But the other side of the coin, that those type of speakers do require damping. And there's another fine side of the coin, is that you will get over dampened sound. The audiophile community is really hung up on under damped sound, which sounds like a flabby, muddy bass. It's not under damped, it's flabby and muddy. If it's with a transistor amp, then it's usually under damped, but with tube amplifiers, and those speakers that match tube amplifiers, damping factor works in a very different way than it does in the case of solid state amps. But there's the other side of the coin, when the bass is too tight, and then it's over damped. So people who do not have good hearing in the bass, for them there's no such thing as too tight bass. They think the tighter the better. But when you compare it to real live bass, there is no overdamped sound in real life. For example, you are sitting at the orchestral hall and you are listening to whatever symphony, then based on the position you pick, the sound will be what we would call neutral, or you could get sound which is underdamped, so which is flabby bass, but you will not get sound which is overdamped. We only get overdamped sound when we record in a studio. And that's why people tend to have preference towards heavily overdamped sound, because we now have more than a generation who grew up on studio recordings, and that really messed up our ears. So we have no clue, or no, I would say not no clue, but our reference point is not natural music anymore, but it's the studio castrated sound. So that's another point that for your thoughts, whether that has bothered you, whether that entered your thoughts before, that there's not just underdampened but overdampened sound. If you do not hear that, or you just need it as tight as you need, then good, you have an easier road cut up ahead of you, because you will be very happy with most transistor amps. If overdamping bothers you a great deal, like me, I can't stand that type of sound at all, because it's so unnatural. It feels to me as if the players are constipated. It's not a nice feeling that it projects. Then you need to go to tube amplification. And I have here one more subject that we touch on, the mid-range. So here that's a representation of a piece of our brain, which is the center for processing sound. And as you see, the majority of it is for processing mid-range. Let me try to get a pointer here for you. There is no laser pointer. So this is the over 90% of our acoustic cortex, and this tiny piece here, that's responsible for processing all the information below 500 hertz. And this tiny piece is responsible for the really high frequencies, like 16 kilohertz plus. And here that's from 500 to 8 kilohertz. Basically that's the meat of our processing center, and that's because it's these frequencies that carry spatial information. So based on the phase information and echoes and delays in these frequencies, and the ratio of these frequencies towards each other, that's how our brain processes 3D around us. So that's how you get how far, like someone drops a keychain, then you can tell which direction was that keychain dropped and how far it was. And if you have perfect pitch, you can name what kind of notes each of the keys made when it was dropped. And that's why we have such a complexity in the brain to be able to account for all of that. And most of it is, yes, in the mid-range and the low-high frequencies. So most audiophiles obsess with the bass, they obsess with the extended highs up to the ultrasound frequency, but the meat of your presentation is the mid-range. So if your speaker doesn't do mid-range well, on the long run, you will not like it. You will like it for a month maybe, but once, because it does maybe excellent low end and excellent high end, but after your brain figures out what's going on, that you have been duped, then you will be jaded with it and you need to upgrade. So this happens to audiophiles, that if there is a big deficiency in the speakers, and which is usually there because most companies go for really showy bass and really showy highs, and the only way to do that, to pop them out, is to suck out the mid-range. And in the beginning, if you have a system like that and you compare that to a balanced system, in an A/B test, you will like this messed up situation where the mid-range is messed up and lows and highs are more prominent, because it sounds more, it has a bigger impression. And this is when you hear stuff that you normally hasn't heard before. I never heard that there's a cymbal there. Yes, you did not, because the voice is the most important part of the song, and that's just in the background to just shape the sound. But now with this kind of speakers, when the extremes are over exaggerated, then everything which is in those frequency regions pops out. It just dazzles you. But when your brain figures out that you've been duped, your mid-range has been taken away from you, that's when you want to upgrade. And this is the reason why there are some speakers that by today's standards do not sound showy or special at all, but they have great mid-range. Then people who have such speakers will use them for life. So for example, there are the quad speakers, and they have fantastic great mid-range, and I know people, I know friends who have quads and they love them absolutely, and they don't want to change them, and my recommendation is don't change them. Because if you change, you might get better dynamics and you will like that for a month or two, but then your brain will miss what you sacrificed, the mid-range, which is you sacrifice 90% to gain the extra 10% at the end. So that's another thing for you, that if you what is more important in the music. And especially if you listen to classical music, then the mid-range gets even bigger importance. But if you listen to jazz, then you want those usual high-end speakers that emphasize the high-end, emphasize the low-end, and they don't really care about the mid-range, because like in most jazz performances, it's all about sax. It's all about the drums, and if you have a piano that carries mid-range, it's usually just an upright piano, and it's the tone doesn't matter. It's just the melodic content and how they play with the group. That's what counts. So that's why I really emphasize that you have to know what kind of music you listen to, because if you don't, you will end up using the wrong kind of system. Now, the second thing we need to be looking at is listening habits.